Welcome to DLA Dialogues from Factory to Foxhole, the podcast where we dive into the heart of DLA's mission and mindset. I'm your host, Jake Boyer. Today we're talking about how DLA troop support meets warfighter demands and why uniform design standardization matters to readiness and contested logistics. My guest is Andrew Strohmetz, a quality assurance specialist with DLA Troop Support who authored a campaign of learning white paper on uniform design standardization. Andrew, thanks for joining us from Philly.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. Starting off, can you introduce yourself? What's your background? What do you do at DLA Troop Support? And why is that mission important to you?
Sure. So I'm a quality and technical services branch chief here in the CNT supply chain at Troop Support. So my team handles all of the quality assurance functions for, a variety of items, namely battle dress uniforms or BDUs, extreme cold weather clothing, PT gear, accessory items like socks, belts, or base layers. And, quality assurance is a little bit different here in CNT compared to other supply chains. So we're much more hands-on with the items that we manage compared to others. So we're evaluating items hands-on throughout all stages of the acquisition lifecycle, whether it be a product demonstration model during the solicitation phase, we're evaluating items for first article testing or pre-production samples. We're coordinating with our product test center to conduct testing here at Troop Support. We also provide support to our industrial base as well. So we handle any technical questions that they may have. We work with our service partners to, approve or deny waiver requests that they may have or any engineering design changes that they may propose to, better support the warfighter.
In addition to clothing and textiles, Troop Support covers the subsistence, construction and equipment, and medical supply chains. How does that breadth impact readiness and the joint force?
Sure. So like you said, Troop Support meets warfighter demands over a variety of items, whether it be we have 2,100 employees working worldwide to, execute that mission, whether it be the food they eat, the clothes they wear, the equipment, pharmaceuticals, or medical supplies that they may use. I like to think that anything that touches the warfighter, Troop Support is supporting and getting those items to the warfighter.
Awesome. You wrote a white paper on uniform design standardization. That can sound like a niche issue, but your paper makes the case that this is really about supply chain resilience and readiness. What challenge were you trying to highlight?
Sure. So uniform design standardization has been a topic of conversation throughout the DOW for a long time, longer than I've been at Troop Support, right? But the problem I wanted to highlight is rooted from a war game report that the CNT supply chain conducted back in 2023. So in that war game, we were looking at a large-scale contingency operation in Indo-PACOM with a peak mobilization of 300,000 personnel in a given month. That war game highlighted several limitations and vulnerabilities in our supply chain when trying to meet these surge requirements of our customers. So there were bottlenecks at every tier of the supply chain, whether it be the cut and sew facilities not being able to acquire the fabric they needed to meet demand. They weren't able to hire the adequate personnel to manufacture the uniforms. Our fabric suppliers in our tier 2 of the supply chain were unable to get the thread or the yarn they needed to weave or knit the fabric of our uniforms. So ultimately, the war game found that there was an 18-month gap between DLA's demand and industry's capability to ramp up. So those findings that came out of the war game report had several recommendations. Looking for opportunities for commonality and uniform design standardization were kind of the main drivers of what we looked at here in the white paper.
In practical terms, what do you mean by uniform design standardization and commonality?
Right. So the two terms are similar, but there are subtle differences between the two. So uniform design standardization is basically just a single design solution for all the services to wear. So that might be all of the services adopting the Army's improved hot weather combat uniform, where commonality is a bit different, where we look for opportunities to make the uniforms more common. So whether that be how a coat's chest pockets are constructed, whether it be looking at, the seam types or, whether trousers have a button fly or a zipper fly. So there's a lot of efficiencies gained by, ensuring that all the services are following the same processes and the designs and requirements of their uniforms.
This podcast is about factory to foxhole, so let's make the link explicit. In a contested logistics environment, why should our workforce care about something like uniform commonality?
Sure. So first and foremost, commonality and standardization are going to provide increased customer support. So by making one uniform and having one production line, there's going to be a lot of efficiencies gained. So by having one production line, industry is going to achieve economies of scale. So, that's going to enable them to invest in technology to help further automate their processes and be able to, make more uniforms in less amount of time. There's going to be costs, there's going to be cost benefits to these economies of scale as you're able to automate and produce more uniforms in a shorter amount of time. Costs of uniforms are going to be coming down. And last but not least, these economies of scale, they enable innovation and technological advancements to impact all services at one time. So if we look at signature and thermal management, if we look at camouflage innovations, if we look at PFAS replacements, by having one uniform that all the services are wearing, we're going to be able to have those innovations are going to impact all the services at the same time, rather than having to go through testing and development for the Marines or for the Army or for the Navy and so on. So a lot of efficiencies gained there.
That really sounds like the 2000s all over again to this old soldier with the other side of what you're describing. If access is constrained, timelines compress, and demand spikes, what advantage does a more standardized approach give DLA and our industry partners?
Sure. So I talked about it a little bit too, and then I think the war game highlights it best, right? So at our current state, we're looking at an 18-month ramp up for industry to meet surge requirements in the event of a contingency, right? So all of the things that I just discussed, industry being able to automate their processes, we're going to be able to increase our supply chain security. We're going to be able to increase our readiness, and we're going to be able to support the warfighter in the event of a contingency by standardizing these processes, standardizing the requirements and designs of our uniforms across all of the services.
Your paper also ties this to the domestic textile industrial base, which has seen a long-term decline. How should people think about standardization as an industrial base resilience issue?
Right. So like you said, our industrial base has shrunk by about 80% since the 1980s. And not just that, a lot of the industrial base that remains, especially for our cut and sew manufacturers, are very small in the amount of people that they employ. So not only do we have constraints in the number of suppliers that we have, but industry is also constrained by their capability to surge and employ the, right amount of people to meet our demands, right? So by implementing standardization, by enabling industry to automate, we're, hoping to eliminate those constraints and increase our supply chain security overall.
Okay. You mentioned body scanning and standardized block patterns, and your paper also talks about apparel tech packs. How do those tools improve fit, forecasting, and production readiness?
Sure. So I'll kind of talk about them one at a time, right? So First off, with body scanning, so when designing clothing, industry creates kind of a schedule of sizes to fit individuals that fall between the 20th and 80th percentile of a given population, right? So the services in DLA have a challenge where when we're trying to create a schedule of sizes for our military, we're trying to, create sizes that fit the second to the 98th percentile of the military population. So we have a much wider customer base that we need to fit. So by implementing body scanning, we're collecting data to better understand our population, and that's going to give us better data and inform our decisions with how we forecast and, forecasting our future customer demand as well. And then moving to block patterns, right? So traditionally, clothing patterns are designed kind of just by length. You would think, a sleeve gets longer as a size gets larger. But with block patterns, we're looking more at the anatomy of a body, right? So obviously when someone gets larger, their body kind of grows outward. It's not just length, right? So block patterns are a better way to have a better fit for an individual across the population, depending on whatever their size is. So that helps improve the fit of our uniforms for the warfighter. And then lastly, and this is the one I'm most excited about, is the use of apparel tech pack. So an apparel tech pack is a visual document and a visual blueprint of how a uniform is constructed. So instead of industry having to page through a 50-page specification of how a uniform is made, we're going to be able to give them a visual tool for them to better understand how to make the uniform. We're going to cut the learning curve and hopefully broaden our industrial base, bring in some new industry partners that might have had difficulty entering doing business with the government.
You also discuss the idea of a hybrid combat uniform, something that keeps service identity where it's needed, but uses more common design features. What does the future look like here?
Sure. So first, I'll give you a little bit of background first. So back in January of last year, DLA and the services came together after the publication of that war game report. And, we decided that we're going to need to develop a uniform that we can activate in the event of a large scale contingency operation, so that industry will be able to meet our surge requirements, right? So DLA has been working hand in hand with both the services and industry to develop this hybrid combat uniform, which, like you said, we're standardizing the design and the cut of the uniform, having the same pockets, same, pattern of or same design of the uniform, while also maintaining service identity by enabling the services to maintain the tradition of their respective camouflage patterns. So we've worked with industry hand in hand, and they've developed kind of the first prototype of this hybrid combat uniform, where they've come to DLA and the services and say, hey, these design features are giving us the best opportunity to automate and meet your surge requirements in the event of a surge. So, let's say they take the cuff design feature of the Marine Corps, where they might say, hey, the trouser pockets of the Army uniform gives us the best opportunity to automate. So we're working hand in hand with services to kind of develop this uniform further. There's a lot of work to be done still, where the services are going to have to kind of have an iterative feedback loop between the services and industry, where we can kind of find common ground, meet in the middle from what's most scalable, but also what's going to still meet our customer requirements once they get to the field as well. So, industry might say, hey, it might be best to have, a patch pocket on our trousers, which, might be like what you'd see on a pair of jeans, but, that's not going to have the durability that the services may need once they're in the field, actually in combat or in theater. So these are the types of conversations that we still need to have and work on and iterate on as we kind of finalize this uniform. So
future sounds bright.
It is.
So
if I could add too, if I could add, one of the findings that we had, this first prototype that industry provided, just to give you an idea of kind of the direction that we're heading, industry provides us with the projected production time of a given uniform. Right now, at its current state, this first prototype, the hybrid combat uniform takes half the time to produce as the average of all of the services uniforms. So obviously that'll kind of correct itself and kind of meet towards the middle, but it's a great start.
The future sounds even brighter than it did a moment ago. So if I'm a member of the DLA workforce, an Army recruit showing up to Fort Benning for the first time, or a general commanding the 3rd Infantry Division, what should I take away from this discussion?
I don't think that standardization and commonality, or the need for those things, are unique to the clothing and textile supply chain. So I think if we want to take the proper steps to achieve standardization and commonality throughout any supply chain or any commodity in the DOW, I think it's important that we foster strong partnerships between both with the services and with our industry partners. So by being able to collaborate and understand where we're all coming from, our mission, I think that really speeds up the process in collaborating and making changes necessary to increase warfighter readiness.
All right, it's time for the rapid fire round. First, name one interesting thing you've read, listened to, or watched recently.
If anyone wants to learn more about the CNT supply chain, one of my team members actually recommended a podcast called Articles of Interest. So, high level overview, the podcast describes some of the history of the clothing and fashion industry here in the United States. And they have a particular season of episodes that give specific examples of military R&D efforts and dual use technologies that have helped build our domestic industrial base.
Awesome. I think that's our first podcast recommendation so far. So
There you go.
Thank you. Second, what's your superpower?
Right. So I might be piggybacking off an answer I had earlier, but I do take pride in how I build relationships and partnerships across the CNT supply chain, whether it be with our service partners or whether it's working directly with industry, or even the partnerships I build internally in the CNT. I think having those partnerships and being able to collaborate is going to enable us to get things done a lot faster and having strong partnerships.
And finally, the hard question, what's your kryptonite?
Probably just overcomplicating slide decks. So obviously with this paper, I've had my fair share of follow-up briefings kind of discussing this topic. And I always catch myself having to, cut some content as I close in on that final draft. So hopefully AI will kind of, resolve that issue by itself for me as we move forward. So
we all strive to earn that PowerPoint Ranger tab. So keep up the good work. I'm pretty sure that comes from the clothing and textiles supply chain. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today and for helping connect a topic like this to the larger issues of readiness, the industrial base's resilience, and contested logistics. For DLA Dialogues, I'm Jake Boyer. Until next time, remember, learning is a superpower. Use it wisely. Troop Support delivers global support across 4 supply chains, and our chat highlighted how even design choices can have operational impacts. Thanks again for joining us.